Hi, everybody. I'm Kyle Ellicott. Good day from around the world. Your host here at VCTV, back for another day of full episodes, a lot to cover. We're going to be kicking off with this very first episode and talking again with our Startup Leaders Club. Now, for those in our audience who are just tuning into this episode, this is a great episode if you're looking to build a startup or if you're currently building a startup as an entrepreneur. I can't tell you how valuable this information will be as we bring together entrepreneurs and executives from around the world who have built, succeeded, failed, lessons learned. We've all got the wounds, but we also have some successes and some insights to share with you to talk and actually provide you insights on a variety of topics to help you and your business become more successful. And so we bring everyone together, and today we're going to be talking about business models in the new norm. And what does that mean? So business models. Business models, as some of us were talking about pre-show, is a commonly used term in every startup and every business. Not everyone knows what it means. Not everyone knows where to start. Sometimes these business models on projecting how your business will grow, scale, how you'll sell products, how much you'll price things for, your cost analysis. I'm diving deeper into this than we need to right now, but the point is there is a lot to unpack, and these are very impactful to projecting and looking forward at your business. And now, with when things change dramatically, and we go through something we just did for the past 6 months, how do you adjust for that? And thanks to business model modeling, which we're going to get into, there's a great way to prepare for that. But in general, how do you reshape and rethink your business when something big happens, whether that's in your industry, globally, or to your business in general? So we brought some of the best and the brightest from around the world to tell you and share with that. At any time, if you have questions, comments, concerns, drop them in the chat. We'll do our best here as founders to try to answer those for you. And if we can't, we're all available online, almost 24 hours a day at this point. We'd be happy to try to touch base with you and go further into that as well. Now, before we kick off every episode, we do want to give a big shout out to Elena and to the entire LA Token team for bringing VCTV to your screens around the world and making this possible. And also, in this new norm, as we talked about earlier, bringing us all together in one very nice Brady Bunch style television screen here today. Now, with that being said, I do want to kick off and welcome everybody. John, I see you smiling for the first time since we started this episode, so I'm going to kick it off with you. If you can, a little introduction on yourself, a little background, and then we'll go around robin from there.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for the intro. So my name's John Whaley. I'm a founder and CEO of a company called Unify ID. Previously, I had another enterprise security company that got acquired about 5 years ago called Mocha 5. Before that, I was at Stanford. I did my PhD there. I also taught at Stanford as a visiting lecturer. So great to be on the show.
Wonderful. Excited to extract some of that Ivy League knowledge to share with the audience today, as I know Stanford teaches many courses on this subject, both online and locally as well. So I know that there's going to be a lot to share. Sandeep, and before you give that introduction, I know you've got an example. You've got a diagram to our audience. If he does not show a diagram in the next 60 minutes, send me a message. I'll make sure to get a little selfie on Zoom with him to share with you. He's put some work in today. Go ahead, Sandeep.
Super. Well, thank you, Kyle, for inviting me to VCTV. This is my first time on this show, so thank you for doing that and bringing me to your audience. By way of background, I am the managing director for a consulting company called the Serenity Marketing Group. We're in the business of building great brands. So, we talk about building businesses, we talk about building great brands, and sometimes those two things overlap wonderfully. I used to work for a little company called McKinsey many years back. And I think 15 years back, I wrote an article on the internet, coming alive, and it was an article called Digital Brands. And at that time, we talked about four types of different business models. And now with all the boundaries shifting, and as I was starting to think about this topic today, there's just so many different business models that are there, not just four. So it'll be exciting to have that discussion with you guys, and let's see where that goes.
Wonderful. Welcome again to the show. And Ben, sorry, I called right as you took a drink of coffee. I'm so sorry about that. But we're all going to go through that at some point in this episode. So no stress, but welcome to the show. A little introduction on yourself and a little background.
Sure. Thanks, Kyle. And thanks, LA Token, for coordinating this discussion. This is great. My name is Benjamin Friedman. I founded a company, Build, Scale, Grow. It emanated from 20 years of experience heading finance and operations at various startups, all looking to do just that. I also founded a couple of companies myself. And so I like to think of it as a culmination of Slumdog Millionaire type experience, where hopefully I've learned from all those bumpy rides and able to pull it together now. So I work with companies to help them actualize their vision. So our motto is that vision without execution is just hallucination. And what that means is we help companies to activate their plans. We look at fast learning, repeatable metrics so that we can figure out what's going well, what needs to be done better. And then we dig into the people, processes, systems in order to make that happen. And so I really see it as a conversion of innovation and data in order to help companies to grow.
That's wonderful. And we actually spoke a lot about data on yesterday's episode here at VCTV, and more around on the deep tech side and machine learning and how data is being used to not just readjust businesses, but also readjust complete utter industries as well. And so, I think that's going to be an important topic today. And to our audience, if you haven't seen the power that data and metrics can provide to the future and just the general day-to-day of your organization, get ready. Ben, we're definitely going to unpack that. Anthony, welcome to the show as well. A little intro and a little background.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me on. I spent about 22 years in Silicon Valley as a parallel entrepreneur. Some claims to fame. Myself with AT&T Bell Labs, innovated downloadable music in the late 90s. Then I went on to create the worldwide ringtone market. And then we decided I wanted to ship back to South Africa, where I was from, to see if I could bring that Silicon Valley mindset to Africa and move the dial, see if I could make something really happen and change. And I've pretty much done venture development for the last 15 years. Started many of the companies myself. I like to be on both sides, the investor side and on the entrepreneurial side. And I think innovation entrepreneurs are the ultimate. They are what drive the evolution of society. And I really feel for them. I like to get into their shoes. And I really commit to the entrepreneur, allowing the actual venture to be a vehicle that can change, as we know, over time. So in many cases, I like to stick with the same person through multiple ventures.
I love it. Welcome back to the show. And James, welcome to the show as well. I'm assuming you're in the Bay Area, or you just really like that sunrise, pardon me. But nonetheless, welcome to the show. A little intro, a little background.
Well, thank you, Kyle. I'm happy to be here with you today. My name is James Bates. I'm the founder of a company called AdviNow Medical. And what we do is completely automate the medical visit. What I've done in my whole career is use technology to automate around what we term as liability owners, whether that's self-driving vehicles, which I did in my previous life before AdviNow, or whether it was back in the world of just simple automation in IoT applications. So as we go forward and we are looking at the new normal, a lot of it is going to be centered around automation and artificial intelligence. And that is where my expertise comes in, and I hope I'll be able to add value.
Absolutely. You should have joined yesterday's show. People would have loved you. You need to talk to Gary Fowler, our grand master of artificial intelligence. As we say on almost every episode in the past 2 weeks, AI is the new electricity. We're going to talk probably a little bit about that today. James, I'm leaning on you for that. Larry, welcome to the show. You still with us?
I am still with you. So first off, thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate being able to be a part of the discussion. So for my background, I'm a 30-year cybersecurity executive. I have helped, been a co-founder of a number of different service type organizations, Links Technology Partners. I founded my own branded Whiteside Security LLC. I've also co-founded a not-for-profit geared at increasing the number of men and women in the field of cybersecurity because there's not enough diversity in that, called ICMCP. And now I'm helping to start a managed security service provider called CyberClan. So my background in cyber, being a cyber executive for 30 years, and watching the startup space, as well as advising and being on the board or an advisor to a couple of dozen startups in the cyberspace, gives me a lot of visibility and advice and things that I can hopefully provide here to help people understand the do's, don'ts, the goods, the bads, and the uglies as it relates to how to be successful in doing this.
Wonderful. And guys, welcome all to the show. Excited to have you. And again, dive into the spirit experience as well. And for me, for the audience, I'm a multi-time entrepreneur, very similar to some of the individuals here. Have a few wounds, a few bruises to share, a few exits as well. And also a lot of lessons learned similar to Larry on boards as an advisor or as an investor as well. So the business model topic is just so incredibly important. So get ready to tune in. And with that, Sandeep, I want to talk to you first. Come to you around what is a business model. I mean, you've defined this with 4 business models back at your early days at McKinsey, but really, what is a business model? And then we'll go from there around to everybody on some bigger questions. But just start us off with a good base layer.
Yeah, so I think a good way to think about business models is maybe to ask yourself the question, how does this thing, whatever you have, how does this thing make money, right? And there's going to be a whole set of infrastructure and enablers that are going to make it happen. But where do you fit into a business ecosystem, and how do you make money in that ecosystem? So think about business models in that. And let me just give you the old examples. Certainly we're all familiar with retail models. That is a particular kind of business. We're all familiar with media models, which are the content businesses. You go to, you read a magazine, you watch TV, and those guys make money through advertisements. And that's a media model. You can have brand models, which is where you have a phenomenal brand and everybody comes to buy you. So these are different types of things. And what has happened is that over time, a lot of boundaries have shifted. So if you look at Zoom, which we are all on right now, the boundary that has shifted is basically bandwidth, right? 20 years back, we didn't have this kind of bandwidth. And as the bandwidth shifted, you can do something like this, where we've got 6 people on a video conference, which used to be a very expensive thing at one time. So it's actually an exciting time to be in this place where you see what were the business models of the past and how are those boundaries getting broken, whether it's crowdsourcing, whether it's bandwidth, whether it's something else, and what kind of new businesses you can put in play. And the more you solve that problem, the greater the opportunity for you as an entrepreneur.
Absolutely. And with that, I want to get into one other big foundation setting. Thank you, Sandeep. Ben, I want to come to you. So now that we know what a business model is, let's talk a little bit about growing and scaling that. So this is part of your core business, right? From a base layer, just kind of setting the stage, what does it really take and what does the mindset really have to be to grow and scale your business model? So once you've got one of those 4, now you've got to grow and scale this. What does that mean to people on the idea of scaling a business?
Right. So I always talk with founders and leaders to begin with a foundation of understanding your vision and your values. Those are going to be constant throughout the whole experience. Maybe things go exceedingly well. Maybe they go the other direction. But no matter what, you're always going to fall back on that vision and on those values as guides for how to proceed and to go forward. I think from there, you have to have an understanding of you and your co-founders and your team's strengths, and look at the market that you're trying to approach, and then determine where are the gaps and then prioritize those effectively. So, of course, there's going to be 100 things or more that you could do first, but you have to figure out what are the 3 to 5 possibly up to 7 that you're really going to tackle initially given your existing resources, and which are going to have the most impact. And then you're going to constantly reassess that. If you're just getting off the ground, you might reassess that on a very regular basis, weekly, perhaps, or maybe monthly. As you mature a little, you might move to monthly or quarterly assessments, but you're always measuring your progress against your expectations, looking at the variance, deciding what has made an impact and what has really provided success for you. What areas should you just leave behind? And then add on, a couple items from that list you generated when you first started. So it's this constant cycle of iteration and reiteration to learn and grow from what you're doing well.
Absolutely. Again, data, 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 until we get to James, when data works for you because it's all automated. So get ready for that. John, I saw, did you have a comment? You wanted to add anything on that?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things when you're a startup is to have focus. It's so easy to, when you're building something new and you're not sure exactly where it fits, to then end up spreading yourselves too thin. And it's much better to focus deep on particular areas and then really knock it out of the park. Just when you're building a startup, you can't just build something that's 10% better or 20% better. It has to be 10 times better than what the incumbent is. For any time that you're challenging, some new industry. So the only way to really do that, and the only way to compete as like a small organization, a small company against much larger, more well-resourced, competitors, is to have just extreme maniacal focus and laser focus on the things that you're going to do better than anyone else in the world.
Absolutely. And Anthony, I saw you shaking your head as well and agreeing with some of those points. Anything else to add on, and even from an entrepreneur point of view as well?
Yeah, I was just thinking that always, once you've got your mission and your vision, it's shopping around until you hit that runaway exponential dynamic, right? There's always a balance, because you've got to focus on the one hand, but you've also got to try a lot of things, right? So that has to be done in serial, and it can be very frustrating for an entrepreneur who really wants to get going as fast as possible. There's a new discipline there.
And that discipline it's a great word to bring up. I mean, Larry, I'm going to come to you here in just a second. Discipline is part of being an entrepreneur. And, if you're running all over the place, guess what? Probably don't have much chance of success. You need to find ways to focus and need to build a team around you who can help you focus on those types of things, because the discipline in building that and making those changes is very, very important. And focusing on, as John and Benjamin mentioned, just those few areas, not everything, because you can't solve it all in one day. Again, unless you have automation and AI working for you, and then it doesn't work. But we're going to come back to that in a second. So Larry, go ahead to you. And then obviously, James, I'm coming to you on this last. So go ahead, Larry.
Yeah. So I want to continue the point, to what you were talking about with focus. You also have to focus on the right things. What I've seen in a couple of examples is founders who come in and have an idea that they haven't fully baked out, but then lose focus on the idea because they want to focus on getting buy-in and selling something that's an idea. And so they go down this path really hard of not having to bake that idea, but thinking that they're going to sell the idea, and they go so hard into selling that the idea never fully gets baked. And so that focus that you talk about, of ensuring that you have people around you that are going to help you stay narrowly focused on the thing that you need to do to be successful, versus letting you veer off because you think you need to go in a different direction, and you're seeing dollar signs before actually getting to the point of where that's reality.
Yeah, and it's slightly different for every business, right? But nonetheless, it's a very true point. I mean, you can't always be chasing the dollars without a focus. And if you are, you're not building a business. You're just trying to either survive or you're not focused again. And it's different for everybody. But you really do have to have that team in place, right? It's again a difference between a visionary who's always just focused all over the place and someone who's a founder who's very focused as the executive in the company on delivering and executing and making sure that all the pieces are in the place to work and making fine-tune adjustments as they come. So great point, Larry, all of you as well. And James, I'm going to let you comment on the topic, but then I'm going to hit you with automation, how that plays a role in this as well. So go ahead and continuing Larry's point.
Sure. You know, I have the opportunity to advise many startups and established companies around the idea of intrapreneur and entrepreneurial activity. And all of the comments kind of resonate. Without focus, choosing what you're going to do and making it happen, at least some type of progress on it, you're never going to be successful in anything you do. When you start looking at the types of opportunities that are out there, with really the acceleration of data capacity and compute capability combined with the transportation of data through cloud computing, essentially every single business function that we have that's repetitive in any way is being automated. And this is bringing companies left and right to go into this. And from an AdviNow standpoint, we chose the doctor to automate everything around the doctor, eventually to automate the doctor away, but initially just to automate everything around the doctor. As we are focusing on what each of our companies are going to do and going to create a business model, I think it would behoove all of us to kind of look at what businesses are out there today, what is the bottleneck for those businesses to be successful, and then to basically optimize away that bottleneck. And through technology specifically, I don't think I've seen I like to call the person the liability owner, but I don't think I've ever seen a case where you can't take a liability owner in a business and make them 2 to 3 times more effective by applying these principles.
Absolutely. And that kind of brings us to the big elephant in the room and kind of what just happened, right? Now that we have this foundation of what business models are and some of the core pieces you have to have, when disruption comes, how do you adjust for that? How do you adjust your business model? What do business models look like? And how do you ensure that you can continue to survive and hopefully thrive versus endgame and trying to keep doing the same thing and hitting your head against a wall and potentially, ending in failure. So with that being said, I'd love to come around to each of you and get your thoughts on this because, again, we know, and we won't go too deep into it, the last 6 months brought a very unique bump in the road for many businesses. This is not the first time. Let's be clear, and it will not be the last time. It's a very unique one by all means, but we've gone through these types of similar situations in the past, about every 10, 15 years or so, if you want to put it on a trending line. So it's something you need to be aware of, but also how does that adjust businesses going forward? And, Sandeep brought up that, his former days at McKinsey, he looked at 4 business lines, 4 different business models. Those are going to be slightly different going forward for the next 10 years. And so out of these types of things, we see new businesses, new services, and new products that can be demonstrated. We've seen several companies that have reshifted, not in their industry, but just the types of focuses that they are, the customer they focus on, to James's point as well. So guys, how do you handle something like this? And how does that affect the business models going forward in this new world of business that we have? Looking ahead, I'll say the decade, but we know that it's probably the next 1 to 2 years, and then business models will be further impacted. So Sandeep, let's start with you on this as you're already unmuted.
Yes, and that's a great question. The one thing, you guys are all entrepreneurs. So the one thing I would say is that when things like this happen, like the pandemic, terrible as it is actually also a time for great opportunity. And I'll tell you why, because one of the hardest things that we do is changing our behavior, right? We get used to the way that the world works right now, whether it's buying groceries, whether it's driving cars, working in person. We get used to doing things, and it's very difficult to change that behavior overnight. But when something like this happens, people do change their behavior overnight. It's like the bus going over the cliff, right? Now you're in the air and you're going to change. And I think James probably knows this very well. One of the hardest challenges he's going to have, or he has, is changing the way that doctors work and changing the way that patients work, and then they want to go to the office, and how do you convince them not to go there and that they don't have to, and so on. So right, so that's one of the things. And an example that I will give you is there's going to be a whole new business model that is evolving as a result. There are many business models evolving, but one example is what I would call business models around experience replication, right? So people are used to the physical experience. How do you replicate that experience in the virtual world? Like right now we're on Zoom. It's not the same thing as being in a physical room where you're sitting across someone, or someone is sitting at your side, and so on. So how do you replicate that? And interestingly enough, in India, there's a company called Geo, which demonstrated very recently that since the classrooms have become remote, they created this application whereby you see the virtual image of a classroom. So if you're a student, you see the virtual image of a classroom. There's kind of a two-dimensional holographic type image of the teacher, but then that teacher has access to different things, like they can do certain things better. So if they're teaching kids about animals, they can stand there and they can say, hey, this is what an elephant is, and suddenly there's an elephant that's like standing right next to them. So I think that whole idea of experience businesses, so don't just think of these as replication of experience businesses. These are actually enhanced experience that you can do. Earlier, if you were in a classroom, you'd have to show them a pretty static image of an elephant. Now you've got a live elephant that's walking around while you're teaching. So that is the kind of opportunity that this pandemic has created. That business would have struggled to get traction. Now suddenly they have traction overnight. And so if you're an entrepreneur, yes, it's a terrible time, but it's also a wonderful time to rethink what the business models need to be.
And it brings up, like I said, new products and services as well, right? And you're bringing this up perfectly. And the virtual economy we've talked about on other episodes here at VCTV, this is $100 billion currently $100 billion economy and opportunity. I mean, we've already have people that are making 5 to 6 figures in US dollars daily or in a year on virtual goods. I mean, this is something that's going to be here. And the idea of digitization, something we haven't yet brought up as a buzzword, but I think is very key here, is a lot of things have started to enter into that digitization way of our life, right? It's been very accelerated, more than I think any of us would have imagined at any point. If we joke about Moore's law and singularity happening and all of a sudden everything going exponentially, well, guess what? If you haven't woken up yet in today's episode, we are here at that point. And so, now I think that's a huge opportunity for so many to take advantage of, but it goes back to focus. To Larry and James's point, is just because it's there doesn't mean you need to focus on it. It's just the opportunity where you may have to, or you may want to begin preparing for. So John, continuing that same subject, what are you seeing as these changes looking ahead and kind of as the new norm?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is a big time for change. And I mean, we've seen that at Untitled as well. I mean, so initially there was a massive slowdown. I mean, our business is largely B2B. And so, we sell to financial services and, other applications that need security. We're also maintaining user experience, and there was a 40% drop in budgets towards this initially, right? And then but what has happened is now more and more people are working remotely. There's increased number of cyber attacks and etc. And so now we're seeing this as a big source of opportunity, because the software that we make it easier to authenticate. And so you can, for remote authentication, there were many cases where, that previously the way you would authenticate is you would go to a physical location and you would be in your office, and that's how you know that it's you. Or, I'd visit a brick and mortar store, and that's how you transact. Now that's changing now. And so that, provides an opportunity for companies like ours to then to really capitalize on that, because we're now changing the way that people are interacting and engaging in commerce. Yes, and the other thing is that the way that enterprise sales has really changed a lot. This is no longer the inside salesperson just going to play golf with the CIO to go strike a deal, or go to these big conferences, things like that. Now it's much more. A trend is much more towards self-service, towards providing more online services, and so like the method of selling has really shifted now. And so there's been the companies that have been able to make this transition are doing well. The ones that are still stuck in the older models are really struggling, and will continue to struggle. And so this again, it provides a huge opportunity for new players to then come along and really disrupt those spaces. I mean, we saw the same thing in 2008. To a much lesser extent. Now this is even larger disruption, and so I expect to see this the same type of thing happen.
Yeah, it's also a change of mindset, right? I mean, as you said, enterprise sales, and that's a very face-to-face type sales process for most, right? And now you have to find new ways, and maybe it's Zoom calls all day, every day, or cold outreach, or just new ways of building those contacts, and then relationship development, which is a whole nother process. And the sales cycle, from what I've seen with companies, that sales cycle is actually in most cases kind of stretched out a little bit, or in others, because everyone put budgets on pause for 3 months, is all of a sudden, boom, let's get this going and get this started. But you do bring up a very interesting point, and also mindset, right? Those companies that have currently focused, and Sandeep, I see you, I see everyone shaking their head, mindset. Just because you've done something the same way for 5, 10, 20 plus years does not mean it's the same that you have to do going forward, especially when something comes like what happened. And having that mindset as a salesperson, as an executive, as a founder, as whatever you may be, you need to be adjusting for that. I mean, are you seeing that in your organization as well, John?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, there was a push towards digital transformation, and that is just dramatically accelerated over the last 4 or 5 months. And so the ones that can, organizations that can get on board with that and move forward with that, then there's a huge opportunity there.
Yeah, digital transformation, by the way, and Anthony, I see you. Digital transformation. More and more, I talk with our group of investors and entrepreneurs here on VCTV, the more I realize digital transformation was really just a great buzzword in an organization. Not much happened. And now things have happened, right? So you've seen a lot of digital transformation that was talked about over the past 5 years, all of a sudden happen in 6 months, which is very interesting. And also, back to John and Sandeep's point, is a huge opportunity for you as entrepreneurs to jump on that, because that means all of those organizations, guess what? They are the elephant in the room that is slowly moving in that process, and is an opportunity for you to jump on. Anthony, I don't mean to steal your moment, but continue.
Yeah, no worries. I was just trying to reflect on some of the things I noticed with the lockdown and the pandemic. The one, and I think the biggest one that occurred to me, is that one should drift over to focusing on essential services. If you're in essential services, you're even more in demand during situations like this. But I think when I generally talk with an entrepreneur, I say, look, in your career, you're going to encounter, or in this particular business, you're probably going to encounter 2 or 3 catch-22s. And your job is going to be, how do you break these catch-22s? And in many cases, an event like this actually solves it for them. In many cases, they step up and realize, you know what, that issue we had before is gone. And the other resistance to innovators is that, as you said before, people don't want to change. If it's working, why change it? Now, suddenly, when this happens, everyone is retuned. How do we need to change? What different things do we need to go forward? So great time to pivot into something. And of course, scuttle closer to being an essential service in the future.
And even have that as your part of your playbook. And James, I see you comment. I mean, that's one thing I'll just comment here as well, is we don't think about this as founders. We don't think about this always as executives. Sandeep does for McKinsey. That was his job. We all didn't. And it's also Benjamin's job as well. The rest of us don't. It's just surviving for the next day, working, making the customer happy, making your company successful. But this is now going to have to be, and if it's not, change your mindset. This has to be a part of your plan, right? You have to be ready to make adjustments and kind of foresee that future, because things are going to move, things are going to happen. And, the last 6 months, just, you didn't know there was a fork in the road coming. It hit you right in the face. And you really need to be ready for that. Great example too, by the way, the 2 to 3 catch-22s. That's some key reflection. I now recognize more of those than I thought I did. So good job. James, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, one of the biggest examples of change from the pandemic is in the healthcare industry. When you start looking at what has happened, I mean, a lot of people think the healthcare industry should be doing great, right? Everyone's going to the hospital. Not really. When the pandemic hit in March and they started delaying surgeries and shut down clinics and forced everyone to go into telemedicine, actually the in-office visits, which was the norm, dived 90%. And at that point, a lot of physician practices were in serious trouble. So from an AbbVie medical standpoint, our goal was to break that barrier and help fix healthcare before everyone got to the point that healthcare is really, really broken and we must fix it. What the pandemic did is actually expose the massive inefficiencies that already existed. And so what the federal government did, which helped everything, is of course force payers to pay telemedicine visits. And that had been one of the significant bottlenecks up until this time to the evolution of technology within healthcare. And so over the past 5 months, it has been absolutely incredible of the speed of adoption of technology inside healthcare. Now, the challenge is that providers or doctors, they're creatures of habit. They don't want to change in general. Younger ones not included in that statement. But what the pandemic did is force everyone to change. And patients don't want to change, but it's forced them to change. And so the opportunity that has presented itself has just been absolutely tremendous. A tremendous opportunity for not only startups, but existing companies to take advantage of technologies to really optimize their businesses.
And Sandeep mentioned this to your point as well, is, whether it's buying groceries online, whether it's going into the office or not, working on Zoom, as consumers, guess what? Our minds are more open to new things than ever. Someone is more than happy to challenge me on that. I don't think you're going to win. More than ever, people. Yeah, we're not going back. And if we do, there's certain things, right? Well, it'll happen. But for the general, I mean, we are very open to new things. We still have problems or things that we want solved in life and products we want. So therefore, we want them when we want them. To your point of medical, we want to be able to see a doctor, right? You want to have a question answered. Guess what? Can't leave. How are you going to do it? Figure it out.
Video call.
Exactly. We're all here on Zoom, and guess what? We're all talking. Now, there is a security risk, which I also will hit Larry with in just a moment. But Sandeep, you have a question, and then Larry, Ben, I'm coming to you full circle on all of this. You're the grand master of today's episode, so get ready. Sandeep, go ahead.
Yeah, so so I think that's a big point, which is that consumer behavior is shifting, consumer mindsets are opening up, and that creates new possibilities. And I think likewise, as entrepreneurs, we have to open our own mindsets around also what is possible in this new world. So another kind of business model that is developing and that is happening now is what I call the fractional employment model, right? Mm-hmm. And this is where we open our mind. So traditionally, we've certainly looked at crowdsourcing, where you're sort of putting out a project there and then multiple people work on it. But the fractional employment model is where you start asking a different question, which is, if I'm a product manager in a company, do I really need to be just associated with one company? Can I be a product manager at 2 different non-competing companies? If I'm a salesperson, can I be, calling on 3 different types of, for the same doctor, can I be selling drugs from 3 different companies, but non-competing drugs? So I think that is where business hasn't really thought about these things before. But right now, with the pandemic, there is also the opportunity for us as entrepreneurs to really challenge all the boundaries, the physical boundaries that we faced in the past and create new types of businesses.
Absolutely.
So I love that. I literally love where he just went, and so I'm going to deal with both components of this pivot. So to James's point, right? Telemedicine is not new. It's literally introduced up to 15 years ago when I was a healthcare security executive, and it's just has unfortunately taken 15 years and a pandemic for consumers to really buy into the model as a viable way to actually get healthcare services. And it's interesting because, and it's not that there were unknown risks associated with doing it. There were security controls put in, 10, 12 years ago as the industry started getting more mature. But it's taken consumers this pandemic to wrap their head around it. And so as founders and entrepreneurs, we have to always think about the mind of the consumer and what are the things that we can do to help them wrap their head around what it is we're trying to provide to them, right? Similar to Sandeep's point about fractional employment. So in the security industry specifically, one of the things that probably about 7 years ago got identified is that the role of the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, is one that is needed from an executive strategy standpoint in every company. However, it's really the Fortune 2000, right, that typically have the type of role, and everybody underneath that, everybody that sits in the small to medium-sized business market has not had the role. And because of that, from an attacker standpoint, they've been literally a meat market because they don't have anybody that does strategy. They don't have anybody that understands their environment. So from a security standpoint, they aren't doing anything. So the fractional CISO was born a number of years ago. And so I've had myself, as well as many friends, who do this fractional CISO thing where they're doing 10 hours a month with one company and 4 hours a month with another company, because people are starting to recognize, and I know in my industry from a security standpoint, that being able to get the time of somebody that can drive strategy and can drive certain things for us from a security standpoint makes sense, even if we can get a small piece of them. But it goes back to the point of being able to help your consumers wrap their head around in better enabling themselves with some of these new types of services and things that we as founders and entrepreneurs want to offer them, and what that value is going to be.
Make it easy and simple. No need to get complex. Get complex behind the curtain, as Benjamin, I'm sure, is going to tell us. That's what you and your team do. When you go to sell it, to Larry's point, and especially now with something like James or others that, and even Anthony has mentioned as well, is make it stupid simple. As we have talked about, Gary Fowler has a great methodology called KISS, K-I-S-S, and keep it stupid simple. Can't recommend it enough, especially now as things are changing. We are still open, but make it simple for us to jump on board. I mean, look at online grocery delivery just as another continued example. It was easy. Click, deliver. Awesome. Took a huge stress out of a lot of people's lives in the past 6 months and may forever change how they buy groceries as well. So again, keep it simple and secure. That's what you do behind the scenes. You make customers feel that things are secure and backed and tested. So call Larry if you don't know more about that, but go for it, Benjamin.
Yeah, so I think this has been a great discussion about how we take the current crisis and really look at the opportunities presented, both the opportunities to grow and also the opportunities to expand. For example, resources are going to be at an advantage now that you wouldn't have seen before. So there are a number of ways to really take advantage of this. I do, however, want to pivot slightly and get into something that is on the top of minds or maybe a little bit under the surface for a lot of founders and leaders. And that is this period of uncertainty and how we've all had to deal with it. Because I've seen founders, struggle with that as well. So I think we started off with this, and a lot of founders went into this mode that Ben Horowitz describes as a wartime CEO. And even if you were a peacetime CEO at the beginning of this year, you became a wartime CEO quickly thereafter. You were presented with a mortal enemy, and even though you couldn't see it per se, you knew that it was deadly at its worst and impactful at the very least. And the impact was on many different levels. And leaders are trying to deal with this. They're fighting to get their companies through this period. You know, they're fighting just to survive. They're making really tough decisions around people they've known for years, around how to service their existing clients, you know, how to potentially pivot their whole business and look at new markets to the dismay of their existing markets. And so in the midst of this fight, a lot of, you know, good things are happening, but it's exhausting. And so then, you know, founders are going to come up, if they haven't already, with this period of renewal and trying to figure out, okay, I've gotten through the beginning of the fight. And Kyle, you said earlier, we don't know if this is years or a decade, but we know we're not anywhere near the end of this. But we've gotten to a point, a lot of companies have gotten to a point where they understand they've gotten through the initial onslaught of the fight. They've made the adjustments necessary, no matter how hard they were. And now what? And it's coming terms with that reality, not to the sense of rumination and getting distracted by it, but you have to bring to consciousness what's going on with you, what's going on with your team, what's going on with your customers. You have to take that all into account, because there is a side to this that's very analytical and data driven, and I love that and I support that. But there's another side to this, which is how are we as humans going to adapt in this situation? And so I think founders really do have to take a moment to renew and figure out where they are right now, come back to that vision and to their values that I mentioned earlier, and then really use it as an opportunity to find their resurgence and to move forward in a different way. Because if you maintain this fight mode, you're eventually going to get exhausted. You know, we see that literal fighters, you know, boxers know there's a time to relax when they're in the ring, and founders need to find that time for themselves.
Absolutely. It's different for everybody. Let's be honest as well, right? As founders, it takes us all a little bit of time. And you know, Anthony, I want to come to you because you mentioned a few industries that you're a part of, including the music industry. And I'm sure at the time when you did do that, not to date you, but I'll date myself, looking at that industry, it was going to be fight or flight literally every day for years. How did you kind of go through that, and maybe what some of the lessons you quickly learned on how to adjust for constant change? Because to be fair, we just went through 6 months. Guess what? Things are still changing. Things are still adapting. Customers, our habits are still all over the place. This is not going to change. Maybe hour by hour to then day by day and then week by week, et cetera. It's constant. So Anthony, to you, how did you deal with this in some of your early days? Again, I'll date myself. You're 25, so you're good.
Yeah. Yeah, well, in terms of cuts and bruises, so I had this idea of distributing compressed music over what was at the time public networks, you know, the beginning of the internet, and took it to the major music industry. And, you know, they looked at me askance. And the biggest learning I had over the first 4 years is that when you try to help someone, expect to be sued for $140 million, which was happened to me. Thankfully, it was all spurious and I was able to get rid of it. But yeah, no, it was really a matter of being ready to pivot. I mean, it literally, we had created a commercial song distribution system, and then down the street, MP3 decided to give it all away for free. So that kind of killed the business model entirely. And it was us pivoting around and saying, what can we do on a cell phone? Where we discovered the ringtone. And that became a huge blast of $8 billion market opportunity. But where we are today, my heavens, it's you know, it's interesting being here in Africa because, you know, there's such an urgency. There's already a leapfrog environment here where, you know, it's don't even try to build the road, you know, just put in a satellite. That's the only way to deal with it. And what's happened is people are so willing to just drop what happened in the past and try something entirely new. And what I find actually amongst startups right now is everyone is talking about the emergence. As we come out again, what are people going to be looking at now? They're not going to be doing the same thing. So I think a lot of entrepreneurs are putting their heads into what is the new consumer going to do as they start emerging out onto the street? You know, and you guys have done it too quickly in the United States, right? We're still, you know, wearing masks and fairly locked down. But everyone's head is tuned to what is the new consumer behavior pattern looking like. So we should have our with a laser focus, we should have our fishing lines in the water to see where we start getting our bites.
Absolutely. And guys, that comes to one of my second or third last questions as we come here to the top of the hour to wrap up. So we're not yet in the lightning round, but we're almost there. And I want to come to each of you. And Sandeep, you brought this up in pre-show with me, and I think it's a good topic to bring up here is business models equate to business modeling. Business modeling can be very difficult, and yet everyone expects it to be easy. So I would love to hear from each of you maybe some of the biggest challenges in business modeling, and maybe a piece of advice to those that are modeling out their businesses either for the first time or looking at this new normal, to Anthony's last comments, because starting with a basic Excel template and going from there may not be the best way as it used to be. So Sandeep, I'm actually going to come to you last. John, I want to start with you if we could. Just what are some of the biggest challenges you've seen around business modeling, and then one piece of advice you can give to founders who are modeling out their businesses, looking at the next couple of years ahead?
Yeah, so after going through this in a number of iterations, I mean, one realization had was that, when you talk about don't even think about how to scale and everything until you have really nailed product market fit, and you really know that people that there is a market for what you're building, and that people are willing to pay for it. And then that's a mistake that often you kind of try to get too far ahead of yourselves, where you're trying to plan out for like the way that things will be working in the future. If you don't, it's all speculation until you actually see the dollars start to come in. And so, not to get too far ahead of yourself on that side. And the other side is, when you are looking at these, for these type of opportunities, look for the major trends that are happening, that kind of, regardless of what you are doing, or like what you as an individual entrepreneur can do, just kind of be able to jump in front of it. It's kind of like you want to look for a parade that's forming, and then just go and jump in front of that parade. And so if there's an opportunity to be able to do that, then those are the ones that, it's because, it's like you're as an entrepreneur, you're just like, this individual just like trying to push these tidal wave forces that are happening. It's much better just like ride along with a tidal wave, and figure out like where those type of opportunities are, and then go and just execute and just jump on top of them.
James.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing that I've seen with business model changes that I think through the pandemic has actually accelerated dramatically is the per click model of revenue. Historically, people have been willing to buy in bulk, or to contract for a year, or to basically plan out ahead and do things with a lot of project planning and execution in mind. What we've seen, especially in a lot of SaaS businesses that I've been involved with, is that now everyone's looking at, okay, what can I do today? And I want it to be this month. And I want it to be, and I don't want to be tied in. I don't want to be locked down. From the entrepreneurial standpoint, of course, going to your investors and saying, I don't have a flat fee, I have a per click fee. Nobody likes that unless you have a lot of history behind the fact that the clicks don't change that much. But what we do see from the consumer space today, specifically as we're building out our models, is that is the preferred model, because no one knows what tomorrow's going to bring. And so this is what we see as the new normal, at least in the short term. And for a lot of businesses, especially, I mean, I read somewhere that 60% of all startups are SaaS businesses today. It's a very interesting normal for almost all entrepreneurs, it sounds like.
Wow. And to think that in the early 2000s, most didn't believe SaaS would actually be a business. And here we are, 60% and growing. Similar to blockchain, which we're going to talk about later here on VCTV, but we'll hold that for a little bit longer. Larry, to you, same question.
Yeah, you know, as we look at what we're dealing with now, we look at where we're going. I think we've all got to change our narrative of what we think we do to be successful as entrepreneurs and how we better serve those that we're looking at, right? We recognize that change is here and it's here for the foreseeable future. And so then what does that mean to our business models? What does that mean to how we operate? What does that mean to the idea that we had of what our product or service was going to do to add value? And we've got to build in that pivot because there's probably more change coming, right? We need to look at this as the beginning of what could be a lot of change over the next, 3 to 5 years, as it relates to, we've got 5G happening. We've got all of these different technological components that are being integrated with social change, and things like this pandemic. And so I think that we've got to start forcing ourselves to be more nimble. I think you had mentioned that early on, of the ability to be able to pivot as it relates to what we're doing to better meet the new needs of what these customers are, and in some way trying to visualize what that's going to be before it happens. And I don't think any of us have a crystal ball, but for those entrepreneurs who really succeed, you sort of have to. You sort of have to be able to predict some of these things and sort of see down the line of what's going to happen. So in the cyberspace specifically, right? As attacks are growing and we're watching it become easier for the novices to get involved in being part of the attack ecosystem. We've got to figure out how do we mitigate the risk easier, right? Utilizing AI, utilizing machine learning, and automating as much as we can is going to be a huge value in our chain, and we've started to recognize that.
Absolutely, such a great point. And unfortunately, we're almost out of time, so we won't have a chance to really dive into that deeper. But absolutely, Benjamin, I'll let you go, and then Anthony, and then Sandeep. And I apologize, gentlemen, we're going to have to be a little shorter on our answers as we're coming up to time here in just a moment or two. But go ahead, Benjamin.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Kyle. I just want to build on Larry's point because I thought it made a lot of sense and it helped to connect everything we've been talking about. We started off, with the idea of innovation. Well, innovation, to Larry's point, requires predictability. And in order to ensure that predictability plays out, we have to look at accountability. So we have to really take our focus, look at a couple items that we're predicting will play out, and then measure the data behind that. And in addition to my point earlier around leadership, we have to do the same thing. We have to open ourselves up to be accountable as leaders and to learn in the same way that you would in data-driven analysis.
Absolutely. Anthony.
Yeah, just a little left field here. In terms of what's been happening, my sense is that revenues have been a sort of a suspended animation notion while we now drift over to what is the meaning and what is the value. And I think we're focusing more on that now and just making sure there's some margin component in it. But meaning and value, I think, has become much more central in everyone's thinking.
I love it. Sandeep, close us out.
Great. Now, that was just a wonderful discussion. I learned a lot from this. I think if you're an entrepreneur, there are just a few questions that I would have you ponder over, and that'll make you ready for your business model, whatever it happens to be. So one is, do you have a product or service that people are going to absolutely crave? Like someone said here, don't do the 10% incremental thing. Do something that adds 10x the value. Second thing I would say is, as you build your business models, have a plan for the day after, which is after you're built it. You do your web development, whatever you have to. After you've built it, what happens the next day? Have a plan for that on day one. And then finally, I would say, be in the fight for 5 to 10 years. Be prepared to be in the fight for 5 to 10 years. We talked a lot about focus. We talked a lot about pivoting, and both of those things will happen to all of you. So I think what you have to really focus is on the concept of pivoting to convergence, right? Which is, yes, you will change your business model, but keep converging to a point that delivers that exceptional value, and be prepared to be in that fight for 5 years.
Absolutely. You're not in this for half a second. You're in this for the long haul. If you're in it for just a half a second, you're in the wrong business. If you're in it for the long haul, hopefully you're in the right business. Gentlemen, again, thank you so much for your time. I want to make sure you each get a chance to shout out where everyone can find you online as well. Give maybe a URL or also LinkedIn, et cetera. So Sandeep, you went last. Go ahead real super quick. Where can everyone find you online?
Sure. I think the easiest place to find me is on LinkedIn under my name, Sandeep Dayal at Serenti.
Wonderful. James.
advinowmedical.com. So advinow.com is the place to go. I am also on LinkedIn, of course, under James Bates.
Wonderful. Larry.
Yeah, I'm the only Larry Whiteside Jr. on LinkedIn, so don't forget the junior.
It's a rarity, a pleasure and an honor to meet the one and only. Anthony, where can everyone find you?
Anthony Stonefield, LinkedIn. That's the best place. Thanks.
Wonderful. Benjamin.
Thanks, Kyle. You can find us at webuildscalegrow.com.
Awesome. And John.
Unify.id. So you can also hit me up on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Guys, again, thank you so much for your time. To your audience, I hope you took a lot of notes. If you didn't, we will have this episode available for everyone to go through, recapture. We'll have a full summary around this because the insights that were provided in the last 60 minutes are invaluable for how much that will impact the future of your business. Each of us are available online 24/7. As we mentioned, you can find us all on LinkedIn, if not at our respective websites. This was an outstanding episode of Startup Leaders Club. Again, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining and sharing so much about business models and where things are going from here. To our audience, if you like what you heard today, make sure you click subscribe, give us a thumbs up, reach out to us. If you're a founder, you're an executive, you want to join Startup Leaders Club, want to share some of your stories, some of your insights as we did today, let us know. We'd love to have you. And with that, a thank you to Elena, the entire LA Token team for bringing this episode of VCTV together. To your audience, we're going to take a break. I'm Kyle Ecott, your host. We'll be back in about 15 to 20 minutes, talk to you about this subject leading into fintech, blockchain, and deep technologies and how those are playing a role in all of our businesses, where the investments are going, where they're not, how these play a role in the future of our businesses, products, and services. Gentlemen, again, thank you so much. Thank you to our audience. Elena, VCTV. We'll see you back here in 10. Bye, everybody.